Hi, everybody. I'm Christoph Wolff, CEO of Smart Freight Center, and I'm here with Nico De Golia, who is the Director Sustainability and Innovation at Microsoft Logistics. So we are this week at our US Fall Meeting of SFC members and partners in Seattle, Washington. And I'm very happy for Nico to be with me here in Seattle. And Nico, actually, Microsoft is hosting us for this week.
Yeah, thanks for being here and thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
Excellent. The idea of the Smart Freight conversation is to give a little bit of an glimpse into how our members and partners are looking into that. I think there couldn't be a better basically start of this than the conversation with Nico, because Nico has been with Smart Freight Center, has been working with Smart Freight Center for quite a while. And maybe I'll give you an opportunity to introduce yourself and say a little bit about how the connection to Smart Freight Center has been.
Sure, yeah. So thanks everybody for tuning in. Again, I'm Nico De Golia, and we're here today to talk about sustainable freight because it is core to Microsoft's decarbonization objective. I think we've been hearing that throughout the conference about how freight is the unlock that we need in order to achieve our sustainability goals, not just for Scope 3 Category 4, but also for our business travel, employee commute, purchase goods and services as well. We've been working very closely with the Smart Freight Center for a number of years as Microsoft, since I believe about 2021, partnering to deploy, of course, the GLEC framework as our carbon accounting methodology, but then also working together to transition from having that data insight into deploying of projects in partnership with other members of the value chain, because sustainability is a team sport, and that's what we like to say here at Microsoft. But I've actually been working with the Smart Freight Center now for a number of years, in a couple of former roles that I was responsible for on the carrier side, working through the Clean Cargo Working Group on ocean freight, and then before that at another organization helping to convene the different members of the value chain that are now part of the Smart Freight Center community. And it's just so exciting to see that every year that we have this fall meeting, and we're excited to host it here in Washington this year, but every year it seems like we almost double in size. And so I think that it's going to be exciting to watch the community of sustainable freight buyers and practitioners continue to grow here in the United States.
Yeah, excellent. No, thank you. I think indeed Nico has a great overview and actually makes great contribution to almost all our programs. So no matter if it's on the method and standard side. So I think we should talk a little bit about book and claim.
Yeah,
so
of course.
why book and claim is important.
Core.
And then in road freight, so basically Nico was at the, has helped greatly to initiate the work on the I-10 corridor in the United States. And if we can talk a little bit about that as well.
Sure.
And we already mentioned the participation and contribution, leadership contribution to the clean cargo and the clean air transport communities. Maybe we can talk a little bit about book and claim. So why is book and claim actually relevant?
I think that book and claim is one of those concepts that's hard for people to understand, right? Because freight is so tangible. We see the truck going down the road. We know that there's, in most cases, diesel fuel that's being combusted in order to move it. And that truck is carrying our freight, but we need that truck to be decarbonized in line with our sustainability objectives by January 1st, more or less, of 2030. And that's a really tall order to do at the scale that Microsoft is trying to decarbonize, along with all of our customers and our suppliers and our partners on this journey. And so what book and claim allows us to do is it allows us to actually separate out the environmental benefit of some of the investments that we're making and the transport activity itself. It allows us to effectively, as Microsoft, a company with a leading commitment in this space of sustainability and focusing in on transportation, but it also applies to other parts of our emissions footprint. It allows us to continue to invest capital into the transition to ensure that that transition is as fast as possible and as just as possible, but also at the same time is happening in a way that's as capitally efficient as possible. And so book and claim allows us to do that because we no longer have to necessarily consume energy in order to move energy So where it exactly matches the profile of our supply chain or exactly matches the duty cycle of the asset that we're trying to help mitigate, but it allows us to claim the environmental benefit associated with the investments that we're making to help the industry achieve that future where every single truck that's going down the road is battery electric or powered with some type of zero or near zero carbon energy source, where every plane in the sky is on some type of low carbon or no carbon aviation fuel. And so that's where we're trying to get to. But of course, if you try to build the entire system at the beginning, you're going to fail. We know that. We approach it from really the same way that I think we would approach our technology innovation. Let's see what the vision is and then work our way backwards to get small bite-sized pieces that in turn allow it to scale. And we've seen book and claim enable here in the United States. And we learned this from Aaron Robinson from IAG, who's another guest maybe to have on the podcast sometime. But we learned this from Aaron Robinson at IAG yesterday that every single year since we've been working with book and claim as Microsoft and a bunch of other folks here in the US to deploy sustainable aviation fuel, that the market has effectively tripled every year on the supply side. And that's what book and claim allows us to do.
Yeah. No, I think if you listen to the market signal, I think sustainable aviation fuel is currently doesn't seem to be at a high point. So I think there's when it comes to supply, financial close, etc. So I think that the actual reduction of production, especially here in the US, I think there's a bit of a pullback, etc. But as you said, I think book and claim transactions are on the rise. The share of voluntary contributions to this is actually growing. And I think this ties a lot into the Microsoft sustainability vision. So maybe we can go back to that one. There's few more things to share and maybe to assess where you are in the journey towards that.
Sure. Yeah. So Microsoft had made a commitment in 2020 that was considered to be one of the most ambitious commitments of its time. And I think now as we've moved forward about 5 years and we're halfway to our commitment date, is now seeming even more ambitious than it maybe felt in 2020. And I'll get back to that in a moment. But what are the commitments? The commitments are for us to be carbon negative across all scopes of emissions, water positive, meaning that we clean and reintroduce more water into the local environment than we consume, zero waste as well from our direct operation, and to protect more land than we use in the ecosystems, globally compared to what we use in our operating footprint. And those 4 goals, when we set those in 2020, were called a moonshot because we had no idea how we were going to get there, but we knew that it was important in order to support the communities in which we operate, in order to enable our customers to achieve their sustainability targets, but also in order to enable all of us to be proud to come to Microsoft every single day as employees. Fast forward to 2025 from 2020, what our president, Brad Smith, says is the moon feels like it's moved. We had a moonshot and now the moon is significantly further away. And the deploying of the technologies that we need in order to get to the moon are not deploying as quickly as I think anybody would hope. And there's a whole bunch of different reasons for that. But the reality is that book and claim is one of those instruments that we can then leverage to actually scale, and not just in the transportation space, but we're seeing this in green steel. We're seeing this in green cement and concrete. The ability for us to work closely, for example, with one of our investee companies, Stegra, that's opening the first ever new steel smelting facility in northern Sweden in over half a century, that is going to be producing the newest and cleanest steel on the market. It's almost a 90%, I believe, and apologies on the number if that's a little bit off, but virtually 90% reduction in CO2 intensity from that steel. And we can claim that benefit in our operation without necessarily having to leverage the physical steel itself, because that would almost be inefficient if there's a market that's closer to production. So that's what, again, book and claim really allows us to say, okay, we have this high degree of ambition. The level of ambition isn't changing, but the market dynamics underneath that ambition are changing. Our volumes are growing tremendously as a business as more and more customers switch to cloud compute services to run the workloads for their organizations. And that means that in order for us to support that demand growth, we have to have even more of these solutions adopted faster. And the only way to really break that chicken and egg dilemma is to say, okay, let's make sure that the players that are investing are able to also get the benefits today in terms of emissions reduction value, so that we make these fuels ubiquitous, and we no longer call them sustainable aviation fuels. We just call it aviation fuel, hopefully by 2030.
I think that's great. I mean, book and claim. So there's no coincidence that a Smart Freight Center, we say we actually across all these communities and programs that we have, we work actually on three things. Yeah. So we work on a diligent deployment of primary data as a baseline for performance and action. And it goes back to our GLEC work and everything. And so that's one. And the second is book and claim in order to scale investment, to bring capital to low carbon solutions. And then we specifically engage on road freight, electric truck deployment. And I think all of these are directly connected to what Microsoft is trying to achieve. Maybe you can say a few words on the, your Microsoft's role in initiating and guiding the I-10 work.
Sure. Yeah. The I-10 is, I think, one of the flagship initiatives that is being worked on here in the US to decarbonize trucking between the ports of Los Angeles and Long Beach, and currently today, West Texas and El Paso. One of the most trafficked freight corridors in the United States. The cargo comes in from the east on container ships or on cargo aircraft, gets unloaded in Los Angeles, and then of course has to journey over to where the manufacturing is taking place, which in many companies' cases is in northern Mexico and South Texas, just like us. And so what we first started doing was making sure that we could accurately calculate the carbon and identify the sources of those emissions in a way that's granular enough to enable business decision making. When we started on this journey, the way that we calculated CO2 was looking at the amount of carbon per dollar spent on logistics and multiplying that emissions factor by our spend. And it turned out that didn't give us the granular detail that we needed in order to understand where should we make investments. We transitioned, of course, to the GLEC framework and used some tooling that's provided in the market to assist us with that, so that we're now able to accurately translate our suppliers' operating data that we receive in through EDI into our transport management system into carbon values that we can then hold up alongside operational data, and we can hold up alongside commercial data with our suppliers and say, okay, this is where the emissions are coming from. And here is how we can do the optimization activity to reduce the overall energy consumption. But that's not going to get us to the net negative carbon ambition that we have. For us to get there, we have to transform the market entirely, transform the energy sources that are being used to power the freight moves across the modes. And so when we looked at it, globally speaking, we move a tremendous amount of air freight, and sustainable aviation fuel is a big lever for us to be able to get to our goal. First off is, of course, reducing the carbon from air transport. Second is then purchasing the fuel. So we understand that piece. And similarly on the ocean side, we have a pretty good handle on that with a significant percentage of all of our TEUs, actually last year, almost half of all of our TEUs transiting on sustainable maritime fuels across the globe. But the trucking industry was one that was a lot more challenging for us to figure out. The distances are long, obviously. The amount of fragmentation in the market is significant, with the majority of trucking companies here in the US being mom and pop trucking organizations, right? And one person with maybe 5 or 6 different assets, and they don't have the capital in order to go off and make the investments in these new battery electric tractors that in some cases cost 3 times more than their diesel counterparts. And so we started to ask ourselves, okay, well, we know that electric trucks are going to be a core part of us achieving our 2030 goal. because we have that underlying data foundation layer that's provided by the GLEC framework, so we know that in order for us to scale the zero electric trucking market or the battery electric trucking market, we have to develop high-speed charging infrastructure, and we have to be in conversations, not just with our suppliers, but with our suppliers, with our suppliers, the charging infrastructure providers. And then we have to figure out, how do we then develop and deploy that type of an electric truck system that maintains the utilization or the optimized supply chain that we leverage the data to institute in the first place in the diesel paradigm. The only way for us to do all of that was to pull together a group of stakeholders, peer shippers of ours, logistics service providers, and of course the carriers and the charging infrastructure operators all into one conversation. And that's when we partnered with the Smart Freight Center, with PepsiCo, with IKEA, Maersk, DB Schenker, now DSV, and AIT Worldwide Logistics as the initial cohort of what's now quite an expanded coalition of folks to go out and solve this problem together, because we recognize that we're all driving trucks on the same lane. We don't have dedicated gas stations, so why would we have dedicated charging infrastructure? And it's been quite a journey to figure out, how do we make this all operate correctly in that context.
So we started on this journey like 2 years ago.
Yeah,
so
we did.
It's actually, now looking in hindsight, so what are some of the barriers? So to get traction and to get actually from announcement to action,
from announcement to signature to action. It's now a three-part thing. All right.
Indeed.
I think that a lot of the barriers are that it's just about understanding. There's maybe a lack of understanding across the value chain of how companies make decisions, right? So, so the way that we procure transportation services from our logistics service providers is one of deep partnership, where we don't go out and do an RFP every year on lanes and bid things out. We have a very limited or small pool of providers that we partner with that have to execute on what we call the 3 C's. They have to give us a cost competitive service, and that's not to say the cheapest, that's to say the one that has the best total value to us as the customer. They have to be focused on cycle time, because the material that we're moving has to be in the data center in order to enable our customers, our end customers, to leverage the cloud services that they're procuring from us. And they have to focus on carbon. So our logistics service providers have to do all 3. But if they're then going to their carriers and saying, hey, carrier, we want you or need you because of a customer request to deploy electric trucks in these geographies, the carrier then turns around and says, oh, well, okay, but we need a volume commitment of X number of years in order for us to feel confident in making the financial investment to deploy those trucks. Well, that's just not the way that we procure. And that's not the way I think that most cargo owners procure freight services today. And then you go one step further down the value chain of the charging infrastructure provider, and they're saying, oh, well, we need to invest XX number of millions, double-digit numbers of millions of dollars to build out the charging infrastructure for those trucks that you want to deploy. That's not a 3-year commitment. That's going to be a 6, 7, 8, 9-year commitment because of the infrastructure and the cost associated with that and how you amortize that out. And so getting all of us together in the same room helped us identify those differences, I think, in understandings of what types of commitments are required in order to get there. And it helped us uncover potential regulatory barriers, utilization barriers, and a whole bunch of other types of challenges that we had to go work out that I have to admit, me as a cargo owner had no visibility into when we started on this journey, but I'm so much better informed now. And ultimately, it's our responsibility as the customer to understand the constraints that are being put on our suppliers to meet the ask, and then to collaborate with them to figure out how we unlock those constraints. And that's not possible if you're not all sitting in the same room, having a facilitated conversation that's, while at the same time as being radically transparent, is also, of course, being monitored to make sure that from a compliance perspective, everybody, because we have a lot of competitors that, of course, are trying to work together on these things, is working towards a goal in the most kosher way possible.
Yeah. No, I understand this was quite a learning journey. So
Absolutely.
I think, so while it has taken like 2 years to get to this point, and I think they're thinking about the conversation over the last 2 days, to be confident that we move to real progress, tangible progress on the ground. So I think it's important to capture all these.
I think that within the next, by the time we're having the similar conversation, maybe at the next fall meeting of the Smart Freight Center, hopefully here in the US somewhere, beautiful, we'll be able to actually say that we have had electric trucks moving down this freight corridor, which is going to be an unlock, right, for American transportation, for us to be able to do that.
No, absolutely. No, I think so. So I think we are, in a way, that the whole idea is to also create a movement. Yeah. So I think this is these are all nascent, small numbers. Yeah, in order to achieve the goals that we need for the planet and for many other things. So we need to share and syndicate and broaden, etc. So what are some of the ideas about that?
Yeah, I think that for us, we think about it in terms of unlocks, right? What do we need to do to unlock our ability to scale things? So when we looked at I-10 specifically, I-10 represented just about 1% of our transportation emissions. And transportation emissions for Microsoft represent single-digit percentages. I don't want to misquote the number here, but single-digit percentages of our overall emissions footprint when you're just looking at Scope 3, Category 4 transportation. But what we know is that overall trucking in North America is more like 15 to 20% of our transportation emissions. So for us to be able to take that piece of the pie off the table from an emissions perspective, we have to learn. What better way to learn than to have a dedicated test bed where we can work to understand how the trucks perform, how the charging infrastructure operates, how do we create this next generation transportation ecosystem on a multi-state basis with different regulatory environments, and operate that in a way that's also efficient so that our suppliers are also able to get margin, because we need to, of course, have them be profitable in order to deliver services for us that are sustainable from a financial sense. It's the exact same logic that we have when we look at transportation emissions all up as well for Microsoft. Like I shared, our transportation emissions in Category 4, single-digit percentages of our overall emissions footprint. But the work that we're doing to decarbonize trucking also has impacts for data center operations. The lessons that we've learned on our stepwise journey towards deploying more electric trucks with renewable diesel is being used to procure renewable diesel for backup generation inside of our data center footprint. All of a sudden, now we're talking about it. The transportation Scope 3 emissions work is positively impacting our Scope 1.
Yeah.
Then we look at the business travel, another, mid-single digit percentages of our overall emissions footprint. The SAF procurement work that we're doing here in transportation and logistics, because of the maturity of the industry and the convening and the partnerships that we've all been participating in as transportation companies now for about 22 years since the founding of the Clean Cargo Working Group, that those lessons are now enabling our business travel emissions to also be addressed. And then, of course, we look at Scope 3, Category 1, the purchased services, all of the consultants that fly around in order to support Microsoft's business. When you add all of those scopes together, all of a sudden, transportation-related emissions make up double-digit percentages of our footprint. But what we can control the most is what we have in our direct operation. Even though it's still in Scope 3, because we rely on transportation partners to execute the move, we have a lot more control over that. And so as we unlock these different pieces, that 1% of the single-digit percent for the trucking, that then starts to unlock all of these other pieces across our emissions footprint. And that's what we heard yesterday from our corporate sustainability team's leader, Natalia, who was on stage yesterday talking about the link between our corporate sustainability goals, objectives, and distribution of emissions and freight, and why it's important for us.
No, I found this whole notion of unlocks and super interesting. And I think it's a lesson of starting small, but then replicating and scaling and have a clear pathway. even if the directly related transport emissions are small single digit, so how can that actually move into other categories and really, build a flywheel, build a staircase? If you think about it, there's other industries where direct transport related emissions are like in the 20 to 30%,
Right.
given the business model.
Right.
So I think if many others had the same, in a way, logic, to how can you scale, I think we would be overall in a different environment. So I really am very fascinated about the systematic approach that actually Microsoft is taking to that, and we are super glad to work together. Maybe in order to wrap up our podcast session for today, so what would be maybe the single advice that you would give to a company that is at the beginning of the journey, that's maybe sees, oh wow, this is actually big, so how can I get my arms around that? So what would be the single advice for others?
I think that the advice that I would have is to collaborate deeply, both internally to your own organization and also externally with various members of the value chain via initiatives just like the Smart Freight Centers, Global Logistics Emissions Council, and all of the different convenings that are underneath the umbrella of the SFC, because we can't solve it alone, and we also can't be experts in every single area. We need to rely on partnership in order to help us de-risk the information that we have and the decisions that we make from that information. That would be the first piece of advice that I would give, is partner deeply to educate yourself and adopt a growth mindset when it comes to asking yourself, hey, I don't really understand that yet, but I'm going to go out and learn. I'm going to give two more pieces of advice. I know you only asked for one. That's the first one. The second one for me would be to say, let's also work internally with your finance organization to shift the mindset on sustainability away from just being a cost adder. Because I think even today and yesterday here at the Smart Freight Center meeting in Redmond, Washington, we've been hearing a lot of folks talking about the cost associated with a lot of these different programs. And they are expensive. But the reality is that almost 90% of the emissions efficiencies that we've been able to execute on since we started focusing on transport decarbonization have actually just come from doing what we do more efficiently, from looking at this activity in our supply chain from a carbon lens, as opposed to just the dollars and the service level alone. Those are, of course, important in core supply chain metrics. But if you also add in that carbon visibility, you can start to make decisions that allow you to have triple wins. Reduce the cost, reduce the carbon, and hold the service level at least as close to flat as possible. And then start to treat that like an investment portfolio where you say, okay, I'm going to optimize here. That's going to require us to slow down the freight a little bit, but we're going to get an emissions reduction from that. We're also going to return margin to the business, a portion of which we can then reinvest in the transformational technologies like SAF, Sustainable Aviation Fuel, SMF, Maritime Fuel, and the Zero-Emission trucking certificates as well, and direct use. And that way, when you're having the conversation with your internal partners, it's not all cost. You're saying, hey, we want to go out and make these investments, and we're going to fund these investments by these efficiency gains that we're getting as well. And so that's my second piece of advice for everyone. And my third piece of advice is just get started. Don't let yourselves be paralyzed by the things that you don't know, because we're all learning on this journey together. We're bound to make some mistakes, but as long as we maintain a humble approach and say, I don't know everything, but I'm going to try it out and see what happens, or as we say in the US, I'm going to give it a good old college try, we're eventually going to find the right solution. It's about failing fast so that we can learn from that and so that we can go and do better the next time. So I'd say those are the three lessons that I would go and leave folks with who are listening.
No, I love that. Failing fast and then learning from that and taking the right steps forward. So thanks, Nico, for spending this time.
Of course. Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you very much. And so we'll have another episode in a short while. Thank you.